Hi, I'm Ray Green, founder and president of Sanford Behavioral Health, but I'm also a licensed professional counselor with a specialty in addiction. And one of the things I love the most when I come to work is when I get to work with the clients. I often have the privilege of conducting a group, and we call it the neurobiology of addiction. And without exception, the clients will ask me if I can do this for their family. So what I'm going to try to do here is take our 2-hour group and condense it down into about 15 minutes and try to help give you an understanding of what's going on. You know, this title sounds pretty medical, neurobiology. Let's be clear, I don't have a medical background, but in order to have an understanding of this complicated material, I have had to sift through it and really try to understand what's going on with the brain and the body during this journey of recovery. I suspect as a family member or a friend that you have often wondered, why did you choose drugs or alcohol over me? If you loved me, you wouldn't do this. You're breaking my heart. Why did you break your promise to me? All of those questions. And in order to answer those questions, I need to give you a basic understanding of the disease-based model of addiction. In 2016, the Surgeon General came out with this hefty landmark report. And what it said was, we need to treat substance use disorders the way we treat any other chronic illness, with skill, with compassion, and with urgency. Why is it landmark? Because it was intended to shift the way our society thinks about addiction. So what is it that changes casual use into a compulsive disorder? All right, this is where we're going to get into our basic neurobiology of the brain. So there's three main parts that are involved when, I'll give you a little perspective here, okay? So this is someone's head. And you've got three main parts of the brain. You've got the old brain. Some people call it the midbrain, and it may not be right here when you look at a textbook. It's sort of located in the middle of the brain, but this is the old brain. And midbrain, and I'm going to call this brain, for purposes of our discussion here today, the caveman. Okay, so this is caveman brain. And the next part of the brain here that we're going to talk about is this little set of glands, and that's called the nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens is responsible for the reward reinforcement thinking. And so this guy's kind of the reward of the brain, that if any of you studied Pavlov's dogs and the triggers when they hear the bell, that's kind of what we're talking about here, reward reinforcement. And then as humans, we evolved and we developed this handy little frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex. And that's what's responsible for the more complex thinking called our executive functioning. And so I'm going to call this guy the executive director, okay? So here's what happens. When a psychoactive substance is ingested, alcohol or drugs, either one, the substance enters and it hits this old brain first. And then this old brain sends a message up to the nucleus accumbens that, hey, this is fun. This feels good. Do it again. And then what happens is our executive director, our rational thinking, kicks into gear, and he comes out and he tells the brain, you know what, you've had enough. Closing time, call a cab, take an Uber. And this is what we call that casual or quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, normal use, is this system is in balance. But what begins to happen is this part of the brain, this caveman part of the brain that was designed for survival, eat, sleep, procreate, all of those things that were critical behaviors to our survival, it was kind of like a sophisticated threat detection system. And what happens is that this caveman kind of likes what's going on here. And so he starts sending stronger and stronger messages up to this set of glands, the nucleus accumbens. And this little set of glands starts getting real happy. And so I'm going to call that the frat house. Okay, so this is now the frat house of the brain. So the caveman is getting very demanding, and this neural pathway is getting stronger and stronger. There are actual changes that happen to the brain during this process. But while this is going on, something else happens. This executive director starts to fall asleep at the wheel. So what you have in chronic progressed disease state is a caveman that's yelling and demanding, I need more. A frat house that is now kind of out of control with its reward reinforcement system, and an executive director that is asleep at the wheel. So the higher level of functioning is snoozing, and the caveman is large and in charge. So here's what I tell my clients, is that when you think about the using days and you say to yourself, why did I do that? How could I have done that? Remember this, the compulsion to use is as strong as the will to survive. That's a pretty powerful statement. So the brain has literally been hijacked, and new neural pathways have been formed. So they come to us, they come to Sanford Behavioral Health, or they go to a treatment center, or they start going to an AA meeting, and stop drinking, stop using drugs. And so this highway gets closed down. This highway gets closed down. So, and you'll notice this with your loved one, they look pretty good. They start medically stabilizing and they're looking pretty healthy. What you don't see though, is that this executive director takes some time to wake up. So this healing process doesn't happen by simply stopping abstinence, stopping using. That there's some time required. And I'm going to read to you a quote. And this quote is from Dr. Nora Volkoff, who is the director of NIDA, the National Institute for Drugs and Alcohol. And here's what Dr. Volkoff, she's one of the premier scientists in the world for addiction, substance use disorder. And here's what she said. The ensemble of brain changes, what we just talked about, can be likened to a broken video game. The addicted person's world is like a threatening virtual environment and landscape calculated to pose maximal threats to their sobriety in the form of drugs and drug cues around every corner and lurking in every shadow. And yet, the person playing the game must navigate this environment with a broken controller. So when we talk about the healing process, the recovery journey, what we have is a neural pathway that's still a little bit angry because it's been stopped getting what it thinks it needs to survive. We've got a frat house up here that's a little out of control but not getting what it wants, and we've got an executive director that's asleep at the wheel. So that then is when the loss of control, and that is the defining feature of addiction, is that the loss of control and drugs and alcohol become indistinguishable with survival. And that's when the line is crossed into addiction. The drugs or the alcohol have hijacked the survival part of the brain, and now that substance is in the #1 survival spot. So when you think back about those broken promises, or why could someone do this to me? You know, they probably didn't mean to break that promise, not with their heart, but their brain was telling them subconsciously, I need this to survive. So this healing is going to take some time. It's why people in early recovery are going to experience what we call post-acute withdrawal, or pause. And as this brain, this takes time to heal, and this takes time to heal. And as this part of the brain is healing and settling down, if you will, there are things that people are going to experience, and that includes memory, difficulty with memory, the inability to think clearly, the emotional overreactions to things, sleep disturbance, that's a biggie, that starts and ends first and last, and stress sensitivity, and also the inability to distinguish between high and low stress is a very common symptom that we have. Now, before I tell you the good news, I'm going to tell you there are the top 3 reasons for relapse. In the first 3 months of sobriety is when 50% of relapses are going to happen. And there are 3 top reasons for that. The first one is called spontaneous cravings. And those spontaneous cravings are part of the brain healing. And if you imagine, plugging an old electrical cord into a plug and you see something sparking coming out of the wall, it's a misfiring. That is what's really going on. It's spontaneous cravings, and those will go away. Those will settle down within 3 months or so. Stress. Stress is a huge factor in relapse, not just because something is stressful, but what stress does is it causes a hormone called cortisol, and cortisol beelines it right up here to the frat house and knocks on the frat house door. So stress actually causes a physical craving. And then the third is people, places, and things. Our brains never forget. They hold these memories. I call it sort of a treasure trove of memories. And the addiction or using memories are technicolor memories. And so those memories are aroused by social cues, emotional things. They can have a powerful effect even decades later. We call that people, places, and things. So the good news is that modern science tells us that this will heal. We build new neural pathways, and this executive director wakes up, gets back in functioning, and this healing process is sort of parallel to a construction zone. If you imagine driving through a construction zone when you have to go slow and you're annoyed because there's orange cones along the side of the road and it's not very pretty, that's kind of what's going on in early recovery. But as the construction goes on, the healing goes on, that highway looks a little prettier, you can drive a little faster, this executive director gets back into sync, and so you develop these new positive neural pathways. And the really good news is that modern science tells us that our brains have a remarkable ability to heal. This disease can be managed successfully throughout a lifetime. One of my favorite quotes is from Terence Gorski. He wrote Staying Sober back in the 1980s. And he says that the journey of recovery is like walking up a down escalator. You can never stop. That's why we call it chronic. It can't be cured, but it can be arrested. You can be recovered from that path. The thing that I would like to finish talking to you about is that I was at a lecture, and there was a very brilliant doctor. He was in long-term recovery himself, and he said that this is the only disease that heals with love. And I was very curious about that because it seems counterintuitive to all of, we just talked about this disease-based model, this brain model. And what I think he meant was that social connections are essential in the healing process. Isolation is the enemy to this disease. And I'm going to read a quote to you to finish up out of this book called Never Enough. And this is the Neuroscience and Experience of Addiction, written by a doctor who was 30 years in recovery from alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamines, and she wrote this book. But here's what she said at the end of the book, and I'm going to read directly from Dr. Grizel's book. It seems profoundly significant that the material change began when my father inexplicably changed course and took me out for my 23rd birthday. Friends' deaths, evictions, physical withdrawal, and a myriad of other tragedies weren't enough to propel me to change. Instead, it was human love and connection. there's hope, and there's a world of healing. Thank you for listening.